What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 4 of Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players, by players, and all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. I'm Brendan Patrick, and joined always by my co-host Hayden Dale. Hayden, how you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you? What's been happening?
Very, very good myself. Just a lot of crazy stuff going on. Obviously, we had pre-release last weekend, had a blast. Was able to pick up a win with Levia, so class that I think is fantastic, but maybe in the public side, maybe a bit of an underdog.
Well, Shadow aside, it's interesting. I also picked up a limited pre-release one with a Shadow Hero on chain as well. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we get into the pod. Today we have got our sort of Monarch Limited 101 pod where we've spent a reasonable sort of few days with these cards now, and we'll take a look at a bit of, we would obviously do a set review. So this week's a bit more of a macro zoomed out perspective of the format. How these heroes play, some of the key cards that we've been looking at, and some traps to avoid, which we'll get into, right, Brendan? But before then, how was your pre-release overall? How did you find it? Are you excited for Monarch?
Yeah, I'm super hyped for Monarch. So it kind of landed where I thought it would in terms of complexity. The game seemed much more complex, and I saw a lot of fundamental flesh and blood concepts that people were able to ignore in sets like Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising. That being, pitching your deck to win, making sure you have win conditions, and yeah, not to reiterate, but this is just this really, really basic and almost useless concept for me to say, which is you have to play every flesh and blood game to win, because you don't just, it's pretty rare, and especially now in this set, that you just end up winning by just playing your hand, right? Mm-hmm. In this set we have dominate, we have big setup turns, all kinds of crazy stuff going on. So it really, Monarch seems to really reward players who want to kind of dive deeper, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's not a mindset thing anymore as it could have been with other sets where you go, I'm just going to play super efficiently and try and get to this end game. It's actually really requires some setup, and it's so interesting. I know, one of the things that James White said from LSS, the game's creator, that this set really brings flesh and blood, realizes how the game should be played, and it's actually so true. I was, a little bit skeptical of that sort of statement, but it's actually the way this limited format plays even is, is a step up from what we saw with Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising, and it's actually super fun as well, which is awesome. It's a balance between, a game that's challenging, but also just really exciting. I mean, everyone at the pre-release that I was at, I went to 3 pre-releases, everyone was having so much fun. Like, it was just fun, right? So I think it bodes well for this format and the future of the game, which is great.
Yeah, and to kind of riff off that as well, I was also kind of worried that the game might be get to, become a bit more complex to a state where it'd be hard for a new player to enter. Mm-hmm. Assuming off this banish zone, this solo on new resources, right? But it does seem like it's still kind of on the same level in terms of, coming into the game fresh. People are still able to pick it up in a reasonable amount of time. It doesn't seem like, the base play-by-play has kind of increased too much in its complexity. So I was really, happy to see that as well. But I love that, we can play these longer, more technical games, and you can really just be in the driver's seat if you're paying attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think we'll get into the speed of this format as well, because I actually found this format was, I would say, faster. I mean, it is fast, but it's because of, I think, how you can craft game states. So we'll jump into that with the main topic of the pod, but maybe until then, if we move into the news, Brendan.
Yeah, so heading into the news, obviously huge announcement. There's a calling.
It's 2 callings.
Yeah, 2 callings. So limited calling, both in Melbourne and Auckland. I mean, I won't be able to participate. I would fly there if I could, I promise, but I cannot put into words how excited I am to actually watch these events and see some high-level limited play. It was a big shame back in Welcome to Wraith in the early days of the game that we didn't actually get coverage for any of those limited events, and yeah, I'm just so hyped beyond belief. And then past that, I think a friend of mine might actually be playing in these.
Yeah, I'll definitely be flying the flag for the Arsenal Pass team. I'm gonna hopefully, all things going well, be able to go to both. I'll definitely be able to go to Melbourne, of course. That's just a short sort of flight from Sydney where I live. With Auckland and New Zealand, that's a little bit sort of COVID conditions dependent on whether flights are able to go and stuff. There's been a little bit of a scare in Sydney, so we'll see what happens there. But yeah, definitely on the track to get there. Really excited to play some limited callings again. It's been too long between drinks, so to speak. And yeah, I think this format is like from just the pre-release, I think this format's fantastic. So it's gonna be a great sort of back-to-back weekend. So it's first week of June, second week of June, first week's Auckland, second week's Melbourne. Sign-ups are already open for Melbourne. I think if you go to fabtcg.com, you can find all the info there for the callings. If you want to check those out, and if you're in the region, or even if you're close enough that you can get there, get along. There's a pretty reasonable player cap, and I wouldn't be surprised if they hit the close to these player caps. So make sure you get in. Yeah, it's going to be huge. And in terms of other events on the horizon, LSS have said they're committed to these kind of level of events as soon as it is possible around the world. So keep an eye out for those in your region when they come soon. In terms of the other things on the news, there's also a great piece up on fabtcg.com of Pick One with the developers and the Legend Story Studio staff. I think that's actually just a fantastic video, a great way to get your mind into the draft format of Monarch and Limited in general. So if you want to go check that out, it's a video. Callum from LSS runs that video and gets a lot of the developers to come in. And I think it's, I know you were pretty interested by that video, weren't you, Brendan?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic video for anybody who's interested in draft to watch, because we're looking at some of the best players in the world. We have, a calling champion, we have game developers, everybody looking at this pack, James himself as well, and doing their pack one, pick one, and they explain their ideas behind what they're picking and why they're picking. And it was between 5 and 10 people. I don't remember the exact number, but the picks were not very consistent. It was it was quite a difference. Yeah, so it was super interesting. Honestly, for me, I go back and I think about what I would have picked, and I'm trying, every time I hear somebody explaining their pick, which was different from mine, I'm kind of like, maybe they're right. I don't know. But yeah, Hayden, speaking of that video, what was, looking at that pack, I know some of the viewers may not have seen it, but for those that have, what was your pack one, pick one there?
Oh, so you're putting me on the spot now. I don't. No, I think it's really interesting because firstly, before I say what I would have picked, I think the way what it shows about this game is that there's so many ways to craft how you go about even just a draft, even before you get into your game state, which there's even different lines within that. But there's different lines within a draft based on, your preferences, how you think the table might react to what you pass, your sending and receiving signals is really important as well. So that was really interesting. And I think why you saw so many of the staff members take different cards, and they also all gave their reasoning, which is great. I think for me, it would have come down to 2 cards if you've seen the video. So it would have been the Majestic Defense Reaction. And one of the reasons for taking that is I think if you pass that card, you're sending a massive signal that you're kind of staying away from light, I think. Because there was also other really strong light cards in that pack, including the Gallantry Gold, which is the Warrior Arms. Mm-hmm. So if I felt like I was going to not take that card and take another light card, I just wouldn't. The other card was Rifted Torment. I think that card is, the Runeblade attack action. I managed to play with that twice at the pre-release. That card is really, really strong, and we can talk about when we get to chain, but arcane damage on a stick effectively is really, really powerful.
Yeah, for sure.
What about you, Brendan?
I land pretty much the same. It's kind of boring to say pick the Majestic, but the Soul Shield, which was the Majestic there, defense reaction, was the only light card in the pack. So if you're picking Soul Shield, obviously you're right. So if you pass it, you're telling people I'm not. It almost looks like I'm not going into light, which could be a good way to fake the guy, fake the person to your left. But then again, you take Soul Shield, the person next to you, they can't pick a light card and stay open into that talent tree. There's Gallantry Gold. There's a lot going on there, and I think when it comes down to it, Soul Shield is also just a really, really strong first pick. I like it a lot more than its counterpart, the Shadow Defense Reaction.
Mm-hmm, me too. Yeah.
Just the fact that it goes into your soul is so strong. So that definitely would have been my pack one, pick one there.
Cool. Yep. Yeah, lots to unpack. You could spend, I think the video is about 15, 20 minutes. You could probably spend half an hour, 40 minutes just on one pack discussing, what would happen if you took this, what would other people do. There's lots to unpack. So I'm sure, obviously as well, last thing before we move on is product is out this weekend. So I know for majority it's going to be first edition because of some complications with shipping. For New Zealand, it's actually going to be unlimited first, which is, it's great for them for practicing for the calling, obviously. So if you can, if you've already got some product ordered and you're gonna be doing some drafts this weekend, or also cracking some packs. If you're just cracking packs, why not lay out your packs and do your own sort of pack one pick ones. I think it's a great way to get your head into Monarch.
Yep, super excited to pick up my stuff on Friday. I know I have a lot coming in, being shipped over to me, which I'm actually super anxious about. I totally regret listing my apartment address on there, which I couldn't switch. I checked. So yeah, I'm basically sending a decent amount of product to an apartment, which I'm not excited for this week, this weekend. But we'll see how that goes. And yeah, I mean, speaking of what's coming up in Flesh and Blood, the Armory kits. It's going to be everybody's kind of favorite class, I think. It's going to be Prism.
Yep, Prism this month. So if you're getting in store to play some armories, try and get yourself a nice Prism promo. Any other announcements, Brendan, before we move on to the main topic of the pod?
Yeah, just want to quickly announce that next week Fab Gauntlet starts back up. So that's the weekly tournament run through the Flesh and Blood TCG community Discord. We usually have around 30 to 40 entries. So we're going to be starting that up again next weekend. It's on Saturdays at 8 p.m. EST. Likely to be moving forward the same prize support of win a box and raffle a box, and with a $5 entry. Still working out whether if we're going to do Blitz or Limited or maybe Classic Constructed. We'll have to see on that end, but really excited to see some of the new cards and just see how this meta starts to shape up.
Yeah, of course. Great way to get back into some some play post the pre-release. I'm sure you guys will announce what that format is very soon, and players can get prepped for it. But yeah, if I'm around, I know I'll be trying to jump in and play for sure. So moving into the main topic of the pod this week. So last week, as I said at the top of the pod, we spoke about our set review, and we covered a majority of the cards that are available in the set through that limited lens. But what we really wanted to do this week is take a bit of a step back from just the micro detail of cards, and take a bit more of a sort of a top level approach of what this format's all about. As Brendan said earlier, it's there is some complexities in this format and some really important things to understand about this format to find success, because it is it is a step up from Welcome to Wraith, from Arcane Rising. So from the heroes through to key cards, through to play styles, through to some of the traps of this format, that's kind of what we're going to go through today. So Brendan, where are we going to start? Are we going to just kind of talk about this through each hero? Are we going to start more of a top level of the format and then go down from there?
So I actually want to kind of switch it up a bit, or make it a bit asymmetric. First thing I want to hear about is the pre-release that you won, how you did it, what deck you played, and what are some points that maybe people be surprised about. Obviously Shane, didn't see a lot of wins from him, so kind of bring me into your mind and how you pulled that off and what your deck did.
Yeah. Sure. So I think one of the things about the Shadow heroes, and maybe to step back even further, the Light versus Shadow, one of my first initial impressions through the first pre-release flight I played was there's about 70 or 80% light in the room. And I think one of the biggest things about that is that it's so much easier to build a light pool than it is to build a shadow pool. The Shadow heroes really require you to set up a game state or know exactly how you're going to win and you can kill yourself, right? So you can fatigue with Chain by banishing too many cards. And with Livia, you can, if you can't trigger that Livia ability late in the game, you could be taking 6-7 damage on a turn from Blood Debt. So the Shadow heroes have a little bit more complexity, I think, to get used to. I think once you get used to them, it's their power level kind of weighs that out, and it's fine. But the Light heroes, I think, for a base level, are a lot easier to construct and probably play. So with the chain deck that I put together, when I was sitting there with my sealed pool, basically what I was doing was constructing a sealed pool where I go, okay, this is how I actively want to set up the game and win the game. So these are the key cards for me. So I was looking at things like, Seeds of Agony, Rift of Torment, which we spoke about, and I, how I would get back to those cards at the end of a game, how I would finish out a turn. So that's how I kind of constructed the deck. I had a couple of Howl from Beyonds, which were really important for what I was trying to do as well. Get those into Banish and set up these big turns. So I knew I wanted to, trade some damage early, set up a few Soul Shackles, see if I could connect with a Galaxy Black hit, something like that. Get the opponent into that sort of 10 to 15 range. And then towards the end of the game, because I'm either trying to, pitch really important cards to the bottom, like Rift Binds or Seeds of Agony, whatever it might be, Plus, just getting ready with a 5-card hand, for instance, trying to defend early to preserve some life, so that at the end of the game I can really just push these big 2 turns or so with my banished cards plus cards from hand. And that's what I did across the, I think 4 rounds, so 4-0. I was able to do that 4 times, and it felt, if you had that sort of game plan pretty in your mind and you had a reasonable pool, you could achieve that pretty reasonably. So yeah, that's kind of how I approached it.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people have this mindset when playing against Shane, you can just kind of block out and fatigue him. But it is that arcane damage that does, it's essentially unblockable in this format, right? So if a Shane is playing correctly and setting up to win the game rather than just pitching a blue card to play out the cards in his hand or clear his blood debt every turn, you'll find yourself not being able to block the damage that he's coming at you with, which is really interesting. I think that class is actually the hardest of the 4, in my opinion. I think the balance of how many shoal tackles you make, how you pitch the bottom of your deck, it takes a lot more than some of the other classes. But with that being said, he is presenting usually unblockable damage, which is pretty strong in my book.
Yeah, it's a combination of damage. It's really inefficient to defend well against Chain as well. So one of the things you said is clearing blood debt. And that's not a game plan that you want to subscribe to. You don't want to be trying to. It's kind of how it feels at first, right? Is that you want to utilize like these extra cards each turn to play them out and then not take blood debt damage, because that's not a good thing, right? But in actual fact, these cards synergize so well together, a lot of them, that you actually want to stack 3-4 really important cards in your blood debt and even pay for those over a couple of turns. Whether that's 1 the first time, 2 the second time, maybe 3 on the last turn before you have that big turn where you're using a lot of those cards. Because you need those cards to be able to push damage. There's no point in playing a Piercing Shadow Vice for 4 damage when on a future turn you can ensure you have arcane damage and come out with 6 damage from it, for instance. So that's really important. Mm-hmm. And then you need to make sure that you're actually pushing damage, because if you're just playing out a hand that deals 10 damage every time, then your opponent can potentially defend that out and fatigue you. But if it's like 15, 16 damage and you do it 2 or 3 times, that's another story, right? That's more than a hand can feasibly defend. So that's when you start to get into this winning position.
Yeah, and to kind of even talk about that point in a worst case, I actually saw people that would clear like a blue Seeds of Agony out of their banish zone, just so they wouldn't take the blood debt, right? They would do blue Seeds of Agony into like a rift, Rip the Reality or something like that, which does totally nothing. They still want to take the blood debt, right? And that's an extremely powerful card in the later game, right? Because you need the non-attack action to allow you to get those Bounding Demigons out. Like, it's super important. So I think, like Hayden said, there's a lot of strategy that goes into leaving that blood out there and creating this larger turn that's actually going to be more impactful than just clearing it and pulling out your hand every turn.
Yeah, you think about that, right? Say you get that blue seeds in there, and you took 3 damage off of it, but on a key turn you got to play that into an attack, push through a piece of arcane damage, and then have something like Rip Through Reality, which now has go again because you've kept that seeds around, and now you're coming in with another attack after that, so 3, even maybe 4 attacks if you can. So there is ways that you can do it, and that's what Chain is really all about in this format. Is you're paying your debt to this demon, I guess, and then at some point you're amassing all that power to just throw it at your opponent. So yeah.
Yeah, and so I pulled out a 5-0 on mine is Levia, and I think the biggest concept that was displayed in that deck was pitching your deck to win. And the best way I can kind of explain this just initially is actually there was a guy sitting across from me. He goes to my locals. I know him pretty well, and he decided he was going to build Levia. And we got paired in the first round. He was sitting next to me. I had won my game a bit earlier, and I was just talking with my opponent. And then at the end of his game, he was out there and he was playing against Prism, and she was just pressuring him at the end game. And he had maybe 6-7 cards left in his deck. He's just like, I can't win, because he's just being presented with just relenting pressure at the end. He looks at me and he was just like, what do I do? Like, I don't feel like I can win. I was like, okay, give me your deck, right? So he gives me his deck, which is 6 or 7 cards. I lay it all out. It's all non-brute cards, all blue, that block for like 2. And I was like, would you ever want to draw this hand? He goes, no. I was like, let's start there, right? So when you play a deck like Levia, I actually had a pretty funny deck on this day. I had about 11 things that were 6 or more power. But with that said, I think it was like 5 or 6 of them didn't block. So I actually wasn't super favored against Prism in terms of breaking those phantasms. But I had also pulled out Conventions from the Bellows of Hell, red. I had pulled out a Pulping, red. I had 2 yellow Dread Screamers. And yeah, I mean, that was essentially my win condition. And all I did my deck never just won the game. There was nobody that I just out aggroed and just won the game. I had to pitch up a setup turn, chip through damage, and then I won pretty much the same way every single time, which was a big Convulsions turn. Or I had a 2-card win condition with Minuism and Red Overload for 6 Dominate.
I did that once.
Setups.
Yeah, I did that once during the weekend as well with my Bolton deck. It's a good feeling.
Yeah, and it's like a funny thing to put in your deck, but I just looked at my deck and I was like, okay, I'm pretty light on win conditions. Mm-hmm. Like if I have to block with this Convulsions, like I don't know where I'm gonna be in the late game. Like I just need something that can kind of surprise people because I didn't expect too many people to be paying attention to my pitch or even be able to do anything about it if they saw that. If you see Minuism plus Red Overload pitch, you're like, okay, 6 Dominate is coming at me with Go again later. What am I gonna do about it? Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was really interesting. I faced all Prisms until I was 4-0 and then faced a Levy in the finals. But I have a really funny story about round 4. So in round 4, I actually played my partner who was playing Prism and was also 4-0. And, we got matched up against each other, so it was pretty funny. And I had this card called Shadow of Blasphemous in my deck. It's a red, it attacks for 6, it costs 2, it blocks for 0. But if you have to banish 3 cards from your graveyard. He banishes something with 6 or more attack. It says, search for a card with Blood Dead, banish it. So I play Shadow of Blasphemous, it hits, I search my deck, and I go, failed to search. And she looks up at me, and she's like, what? I was like, I failed to search. And she was looking at me with the most deadly eyes I've ever seen in my life, just basically communicating, are you actually trying to cheat in a public event against me? And I'm like, because the card, the way that it reads, it looks like you have to search, but in Flesh and Blood, with private information like that, you can fail the search. And she actually pulled up the release notes while we were playing, and it says you may banish a card. And it was funny as well because even after that, I had got her down to 2, and I was on 17 or something, right? It looked like it was pretty in my favor, but I actually had to random a Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell, which had a 40% chance to hit. I needed the Dominate, hit out of my graveyard, and then I had 1 threat left in the deck. If I didn't hit that Convulsions, I lost the game 100%. So it was actually an incredibly close game, despite the life totals. And theoretically, misplayed, right? Because I came down to having a 40% chance to either hit or lose the game.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, right, you want to try and... This is the other thing why Shadow's so tough is for Levy. You need to actually set up your graveyard, right? So, like you say, Brendan says, I had a 40% chance. Brendan knew his chance to hit it because you'd been mindful of your graveyard. And obviously, maybe there were some lines you could have taken to ensure that your graveyard had more 6 attacks in it, potentially. But that's so important, right, about what you're, setting up your graveyard. So, in other formats, it's just you set up your deck. And even that is not an easy concept to get your head around and to work on. But now you're almost looking at a few things. You're setting up your deck, setting up your graveyard, setting up your banish as well. So it can be difficult to get your head around. But I think once you start to practice these things, it gets a lot easier because you just start to do it naturally. You start to go, okay, well, I know, like you said, Brendan, I know I have this X amount of threats in my deck. I pitch them at the start of the game. Even if you don't know exactly where they are, they're at the bottom of your deck and you're going to draw into them. So you want to start playing for these lines, right?
Mm-hmm. And I was really happy that LSS put out the video of the Blitz decks where Jason played Levia because he shows off perfectly on video what that deck's trying to do. This was actually... this was shown off in my finals match. So my final, I actually played another Levia, which is crazy, right? Everybody expects Prism. But that Levia had 19-6 attacks, and I think 14 or 15 of them blocked. So he just steamrolled through all the Prisms. And so we played the finals, right? And the strategy that he took is as soon as he had 3 cards in his graveyard, even though it was 4 cards actually, but even though 2 of them had Blood Debt, he immediately played out a threat, right? So I was like, okay, block, put a Hungering Slaughter Beast red in my arsenal. And I was like, as soon as he puts anything with Blood Debt in his, in his banish zone, I'm just going. Like, I'm popping my hooves, like, I'm doing everything. He's not going to get off a single card. And since he had banished when there was only 4 cards, he only had 1 card, so he couldn't even play, most of Levia's attacks that required him to keep banishing 3 from his graveyard. So with the relentless pressure and the blood debt that he was taking every single turn, I won in like 5 turns. All I was doing when I was playing Levia was just filling my graveyard, setting it up, keeping 6 powers in there, and then pitching the bottom of my deck. Other than the mirror, where I basically played off the other player, waited for them to kind of make that first move of overcommitting, and then I made sure I had a threat in my arsenal, and then I could put enough pressure on them where it's actually going to be unlikely that they could, dodge that blood debt again with Levia's ability.
Yeah, I think it's so. I would love to just kind of like conceptualize this and wrap this up a little bit, because in terms of what this means, because I think there's 2 really key, I guess, principles or theories of Flesh and Blood, so gameplay that you've just gone through, Brendan, basically, and I talked a bit about it, I think, in my chain build. But one of them is building your deck to win and pitching to do so. Right, that is a kind of one sort of principle, which is you build this deck when you lay out your sealed pool or you draft your deck, whatever it might be, and you're actually building your deck to win. And the way you're doing that, which is, I guess, another part, probably that second piece that I want to talk about is win conditions. So you're putting win conditions in there. And you said it before, you had a deck that was light on win conditions, so you put in another win condition. Your Overload plus your Minimalism combo was just a win condition, right?
Yep,
so
exactly.
You're building out the sealed pool, or you're drafting this deck, and you've got win conditions in mind. Once you've got that deck together, now what you're doing is you're now setting up for that, right? You're playing the game for those win conditions. So you know, or at least have an idea in your head about how you're going to win a game. So I'm going to win a game with, with the Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell and a 6 attack on the bottom, whatever one that might be, Boneyard Marauder, whatever it is. And I'm going to make sure I can deal, feasibly at least this amount of damage. So I'm going to pitch that, I'm going to play the game for it and work towards it. I'm going to set up my graveyard, and I'm going to set up my banish so I'm not taking blood debt before I get there and might die. That's exactly, it sounds simple, right? You set up to win and then you win a game. But what you'll find is that as you play against better and better players, right, they're going to do the same. So then you start to have these two strategies sort of like clashing together. But I think it's so important to keep those 2 pieces in mind, build your deck to win, pitch to do so, and know your win conditions and build for those.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you play better players, you'll notice that they will just tend to kind of drag you into deep water, pull you into that late game, and really test that, what you've pitched and how you set up your deck and how your threats are dispersed. If you're not mindful of how you're rebuilding that deck, you might have a hand of all blues, right, that block for 2 or maybe 0. And then they might be doing like, Seek Enlightenment plus Enigma Chimera for something ridiculous like 12. Or I think it's 11, sorry. But yeah, I mean, it's just, it's crazy how one-sided it can feel once you get to those later stages of the game and you haven't prepared yourself to compete.
Yeah, and you can take it a step further, right? Which I think we'll leave this week. It's probably, but I know in the future we will definitely go into it, which is now you are identifying your opponent's strategy. That's the next thing, right? So now you're looking at what your opponent's setting up, how they want to end a game, what they're pitching, and now you're looking at how you can exploit that. So, have they pitched 3 or 4 blues in a row? Have they pitched, an in-game setup? So the turn before they draw that, you need to put as much pressure on them as possible to present lethal so that they actually have to block with those cards from their hand, whatever it might be. So that's kind of that next step. But I think that the 2 key focuses early on this format are how you're going to win and how you're going to do it. I think those are the 2 things to remember, basically.
For sure. And with that, we'll go ahead and kind of wrap up, those anecdotes from our own sealed experiences. And let's move into, more core concept.
Yeah, let's do
You're
it.
opening these packs, Hayden. You've opened 6. What's pulling you into a certain hero, right? Like what cards are you opening? What kind of, maybe you're looking for a certain amount of blue cards in a certain hero. Maybe you're looking for some armor. Just kind of break it down for me a little bit.
Yeah, so I think you just said armor. Equipment's super important, I think, in this format in Monarch because of what those. They're basically, I said these the armor in this format are enablers. So in previous format, they were kind of like additives. So something like a Goliath Gauntlets and Welcome to Wraith was like a way to push extra damage on Dominate, or the way you could get above 12 damage out of your hand, whatever it might be. Whereas in this format, they're actually pure enablers. So take Dreamweavers for instance. That enables a big, sort of kill turn for you by making sure that your opponent can't stop. Something like the pump onto the dominate herald, for instance.
Tenacity.
Yeah, it's onto tenacity. Or, with Gallantry Gold, it gives your weapons +1, which activates Bolton's ability, so you can sort of turn up that way. Hooves of the Shadow Beast gives you the action point, which is so important for a kill turn. That's why Dread Scream is another great card. So that's definitely something I'm looking at. The next one would be sort of those, and we talked about it last week a little bit, is those A-level cards. So those are the cards that are, I don't want to say bombs, because no one card in this game really does too much work. Although I must say Soul Reaping is, if you've played against Soul Reaping, that card is very, very good. The fact that you can play that for effectively no downside and gain a resource off of it, and has go again into light.
Hexagore without a downside.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Hexagore does have a downside, Brendan. You just got to remember that it does.
I read it just quickly here.
Please tell it.
So I lost a game when I played my first pre-release on Saturday. I lost a game because my opponent had a Hexagore, and he swings with it, and I go, "Oh yeah, it hits you for 6." And he was like, "No, like it just swings for 6, and it hits you for 6." And I was like, "Huh?" And I'm not even kidding. I turned that card around, and I read it out loud 5 times, and I went, "Yep, you're right." So I tried to play against a game against Romping Club for 6, and it was close, but he came up to me after the pre-release, and he was like, "Hey man, we played that wrong. I'm so sorry." And I was like, "You just gave me the best news of my life," because I've been walking around the store moping for 2 hours, just being like, Flesh and Blood Limited it's ruined, it's destroyed. Why would they print this card? It's Romping Club for 6. It's Induction Chamber on Soviet Union steroids. I can't do this. I was so tilted. And when he told me, I was like, this is the best news I've ever heard.
Brendan just sighs relief, just slumps into his chair and goes, "Thank God, Monarch is saved."
I actually did. I'm not even kidding. But let's go back into it.
Yeah. So those kind of A-level cards, maybe Hexagore excluded, are cards I'm looking at as well. So there's really powerful cards. I'm looking at the generics, right? This is generally where I'll start. Maybe the equipment first, because I think it's really important in this format. But the generics. So what are my generics trying to do? They're always going to be, there's certain generics that are much better in certain heroes and in certain strategies, right? So that's what I'm looking at. There's cards like Warmonger's Recital that I think is a really strong generic in this format. Do I have some of those? What are my generics kind of telling me about the hero they're going to support? If I've got a bunch of, I guess, generics that are probably more towards Shadow, then, I might take a look at my light cards. And if they're not strong either, then I might be sort of already looking about the Shadow deck I'm going to build, potentially. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. Then once I get into the class cards, now I've already got a bit of a lens of where I'm looking through, just looking at my generics. Now I'm looking at, okay, how am I going to end games? We talked about it already, right? How am I going to win games? What are my win conditions? That's what I'm looking at with my pool. And then if I have a couple that are close, maybe I have 2 classes that are sort of pulling me into them because of these things I've talked about. I've got the equipment for both of them. Although you don't have to have the equipment if the pool's really strong for the hero still. Maybe I have some of these really strong generics for those 2 classes. How am I deciding between them? Okay, well, it's probably coming down to, what do I actually feel has the better chance at playing into other people's strategies? So if I've got a good in-game strategy, now I need to think about early to mid-game. How am I going to play those games out? Do I have more cards that defend 3 in another class, for instance? Or so that's kind of things I'm looking at. What about you, Brendan? What sort of pulls you into a hero? Is it the same for you, or there's some differences?
Yeah, I can walk through my process is a bit different than yours in the sense that I'll generally look to the equipment first and just be like, do I have any of these really good enablers? Hooves of the Shadow Beast. It's hard for me to pick Levia if I don't have Dread Screamers, if I don't have Hooves, and Convulsions is rare, so I don't really kind of bank on that. But if I have no way to dominate the opponent, if I have no way to get go again, it's gonna be very hard for me to win with Levia. It's a big thing with Levia as well. It's you can present a lot of damage, but if you can't win the game, you're gonna die to blood debt. So yeah, but just going off of that, I generally look at my class cards first, but just from a macro perspective. Obviously, when I'm opening it, I'm like, that's really good, yeah. But if I'm looking at all of the classes and I see that Bolton has 8 cards and there's 3 light cards, because there are some weird pools like that where you'll just get almost no cards. I might just kind of rule that out a bit early. Obviously, generics are huge, but if you're looking to play a class like Bolton or something like that, the class cards are quite important. You do need to charge that soul. um, but yeah, I mean, I'll look at the armor. I'll kind of get a cursory glance at the density, and then I'll delve into it and be like, okay, I'm looking to play Brute. How many 6 powers do I have? Okay, I'm looking to play Prism. Am I playing Prism where I have a lot of blues and I want to keep my shields up, or am I playing a more aggressive Prism where I can, just kind of jam these, you know, over I wouldn't say overpowered, but overtuned attacks
Mhm.
every single turn and not really care about them popping it. Or am I, maybe playing Shane? And if I'm playing Shane, it's my biggest question is how am I winning the game? Like how am I going to present enough damage to my opponent to where they can't just go, all right, toss my hand in front of you and let you die to blood debt or let you fatigue out and all of this. But yeah, the
Yep.
generics also, of course, super important. And a lot of these generics are really polarizing in this set. Like you have stuff like Yanti Yanti, which I probably wouldn't play in anything except Shane. Like Warmonger Societal is like fantastic for Prism in my opinion. And there's Rally the Rearguard is really, really good for cards that don't block. There's so many things, but yeah, I mean, honestly, you will need a good amount of cards in that class generally. Especially a lot of these classes are pretty dependent on um, like a core theme.
Mhm.
Brute being 6 power, Bolton charging into your soul, Prism, kind of being big attacks. Prism is probably the easiest one to build with the least amount of support. And then Shane, you definitely need blood debt cards. Shane, you can't really throw a generic pile together and win the game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, Chain is a little bit of a in this, one of these sort of maybe traps that I saw is quantity of blood debt cards doesn't mean quality, and you might have 15 blood debt cards and be jamming them all in your deck, but they might not be the right cards to
Yep.
set up and win the game. So
I opened a pool with 17. It was something ridiculous. I think it was like 17 chain cards, and I didn't have a single non-attack action. And I was like,
yeah,
like 4 bounding demigons. I was like, okay, so this is just
how do I
not
turn
gonna
these
end
on?
well
Yeah.
for me. This is not going to end well for me. But yeah,
Can I want to maybe flip the question a little bit. So we've talked about what pulls you into hero. What sort of because you need to if your pool's pretty strong and it's pretty evenly spread across your class cards and you could feasibly play every hero maybe. What is actively, I guess, deterring you from playing a hero? Like, what are the cards where you go, I don't have this, or I'm lacking this, or whatever it might be, to just sort of rule out certain heroes when you open your seal pool?
yeah. So when I look to play Prism, density of threats is important, but let's say the pool is decent. If I don't have like a tenacity or a dominate, let's just say a dominate effect, and I don't have like pumps to go with it, like I feel like the Prism deck is not inherently bad, but you can lose to this like really. We'll talk about this as a trap later, but there's a really really bad strategy a lot of people play with to do something called Prism Pile. They basically get their Prism cards, all of their generics that block, throw them together, and run 38 cards. That strategy is very easy to beat, but it's harder to beat when you don't have something that does like unblockable damage, right? So if I can set up my Warmonger's Recital plus Tenacity and just loop it on the bottom of my deck, and I can have like 3 Warmongers in my deck, then I can beat any pile, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be no problem. And I don't even need that much to do it. And then yeah, like let's say I'm going into Levia, like 6 power does matter. If I have like if my Levia pool is deep, but I have like 5 things that are 6 power, it's like maybe I can't do it. I mean, that's going to be pretty hard. Also, like I said, like Dread Screamer, Hooves, like these are really important to actually kill your opponent. With Bolton, I want to be able to charge my soul and ideally get go again sometimes if I can. Via the Vanguard is one of the most ridiculous limited cards I've ever seen in my life. First time I played it, I did 21 damage in a turn with it, and with only a card in Arsenal. That was like the only setup. One card in Arsenal, one
Pretty
soul.
decent, right?
Pretty good. And then if I'm looking at Shane, I'm looking for mostly strong-ish arcane damage. I'm looking for non-attack actions paired with attack actions. If I have Pierce the Shadow Vises, I'm looking for arcane damage that's going to turn that on. If I have Bending Demigons, I better have some non-attack actions to go with it. There's cards like Spew Shadow, which are really, really good against light heroes. So those are some of the ones that stand out for me. What about you?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would say those are most of the cards. I think the one thing, even if I'm not talking about specific cards, what I'm looking at for each of these heroes to kind of rule them out, I guess, pretty quickly is, are they going to be able to enact, one of the sort of game plans I know these heroes want to do? So, say, let's take Levia, for instance. I think Levia is a great example. You talked about Dread Screamers. So Dread Screamer, who's the Shadow Beast? So if I don't have some combination of those cards to get go again, I know I'm not going to be able to present go wide damage or have a setup where I present, one attack then another attack that's going to be so threatening that it's going to push damage, right? It's going to get through. So then I'm looking at, okay, well, do I have something like a Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell, or a Dominate card plus the Brute Pump, Pulping plus the, I forgot what it's called now, the one that gives +4 at red, and you banish 3 cards, +1.
Unworldly Bellow?
Yeah. So do I have those, a couple of those, for instance, as some good ways to push damage? If I have none of those, for instance, then I'm probably already putting Levia aside because I don't have ways to win the game. So we talk, going back to that sort of key concept of know how you're going to win the game and build your deck to do it. If I can't build my deck to win a game and I don't really know how I'm going to win the game because I don't have a way to do it, then I'm probably putting that class aside. So those are kind of the ways that push me out of here. And then I'm looking at the rest to go, okay, now what pulls me further? And I guess one thing, probably the last thing I want to say on what pulls me into here is the sum of, I guess the synergies is so important in this format. I think the sum of the parts
so important
of these cards are so much more important than the individual cards themselves, and that's why I think, and we'll talk about it soon because we've alluded to it a lot, these kind of play more cards and throw these piles together is actively so inefficient in this format because these cards, then you're diluting your synergies, you're diluting your ways to win the game, you're putting in more cards that defend 2 or 0. It's it's going to hurt you a lot, basically.
Yeah, and I'm sure everybody experienced this, and it's been talked about a lot, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but every single generic in the set blocks for 2 or less. Is that correct?
It's a good question, actually. I'd have to go. I feel like we should. This is something
so.
There may be
like a rare. There may be like a rare or something, but I mean, I looked through like 12 pools or something. Yeah, almost everything blocks for 2. So if you're playing, I mean, if you look at look at Prism's cards, you look at Bolton's cards, if you look at Runeblade's cards, a lot of them block for 3. Same with Levia's as well. So if you're just throwing in all these 2 blocks, like, I mean, you can get a hand where if you toss 4 down, you're only blocking for 8.
Yeah,
that's not very good when someone's hitting you for 15.
So I've consulted our statistician, Brendan, and you're right. So nothing outside of rares and commons and generic only defend for 2 outside of the defense reaction rise above. So there you go. Exactly. Great point. Yeah, and even in light and in shadow, there is cards that defend for 2. Lunatic Plunderer and Shadow, and there's others as well. So yeah, definitely something to bear in mind is that the defensive level of cards in this format is lower than say something like Welcome to Wraith, where feasibly maybe you are inclined to play 34, 35 cards. Also because in that format you worry about drone, so it's a little bit different.
Yeah, to get drone in this format, you have to use Warmongers.
Well. You got to do some work. Yeah,
turns out that effect is so good that using a whole card for it is worth it.
So maybe because we've kind of been speaking about this already, and I feel like we're in a position to just move on to it. Really, Brendan, Prism in this format. What do you think of Prism? Is it too good? Is it oppressive and limited? What's your overall thoughts on Prism? Let's just get into it.
Yeah, so the best way I like to talk about it is it reminds me of Bravo and Welcome to Wraith. It just doesn't need a lot to be okay. Doesn't mean it's fantastic, and it's also really easy to play generally, right? Like, let's say the opponent doesn't have six attacks that are going to break your phantasms. If you're just playing your hand and going all in every turn, you could probably win a lot of games at locals. Will you win professional events, and will you win, maybe harder local scenes with that strategy? Probably not. But I think that's kind of what everybody fell into. Like, that's all I heard after, the format had been out for 2 hours. It's like, Prism's overpowered, 80% Prism, all of this. I was like, this is ridiculous, right? Because it's definitely not that strong. I think that it's on par with the others. I think that if I have a very weak pool, I might end up playing Prism because I think it requires the least amount of synergy. But I by no means will have a very strong Shane pool, Levia pool, or Bolton pool, and then just be like, I'm just playing Prism because it's overpowered.
Yeah, I think the biggest strength of Prism in this early format is actually coming from what's happening with everyone else, not from the Prism deck itself. It's from the fact that we're still learning the format. People are still getting their head around, ways to win the game, how to set up these wins. And so Prism just gets to punish you for that by being able to, always be able to present a solid attack, have ways to win the game with something like a Hero of Tenacity, or just stick some of the generics just work really well in there as well, because you just have these good attacks. You just get to a surging militia at the end of the game, or whatever it might be. So Prism can really sort of punish that. And then it also has this, this really good ability where the longer the game goes and the less efficient an opponent is playing the turn, the more Prism can get value out of it, because it can start to make these Spectral Shield tokens, right? Over the course of a game, which can really punish inefficient plays from the opponent. So I think that's kind of the strength of Prism. And it's just, it's pretty straightforward. It's easy to play. It's really fun to play. Prism's such a great sort of, it's a new class. It's a great concept. So I think we're going to see that sort of 70-80% of light being played at pre-releases really start to shift as we move into, people just getting their head around the format a bit more and understanding it.
Yeah, I mean, I would be willing to do kind of a hot take right now and say that at the calling, so the professional limited event coming up, I think that the representation of Prism in the first day of Swiss is not going to be like, let's say we look at a meta breakdown, pie chart, all of that. It's not going to be even close to what's represented on top 32. Will it still maybe be a majority of Prism? Maybe, because 32 players is a lot to advance to day 2. But with that said, if we see like a 50% Prism or something crazy, like 40-50% out of the 220 players that play, I don't think the top 32 will hold the same ratios whatsoever.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see what happens. I think I would incline to agree. I think the power of what people can do with other heroes. I mean, I just saw it over the weekend so much. Just even getting your hands on those cards, over 3-4 events and then playing some games afterwards, is that you can do so you're such strong turns. You talk about Feather Vanguard, 21 damage turn. I did a 18 damage turn with Chain pretty easily on a couple of last turns in games. 16, 18 damage. It's not actually that hard to set these up. So yeah, I don't disagree. It's gonna be interesting though. I think Prism is Prism also. There's some really good Prism decks as well. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not just that
sure.
Prism is middle of the road.
I played the deck myself as well when I had a very solid pool for it, and it was quite strong. I really like to have the gloves, but even when I don't, like I mean, at least in my local scene, like it was hardly noticeable. The one bad side is, like, let's say you do have like a Phantasmify. Very good card, by the way. Like, you Phantasmify and you play your big threat and it gets popped. It feels bad, but yeah, Prism is definitely very strong, and the deck itself, like, I think that the deck is most optimally played when you are, again, pitching to win. You are pitching your Tenacity to the bottom next to your Warmongers or next to your Seek Enlightenment. Where you're coming in for this big dominated attack of whether it's like 10 or 11. I think that's how the better players will play Prism and win. They won't just, kind of play out their hand and try to jam as much damage every turn,
Yeah, I will say that the Prism has some really good mid game as well, which helps. With the Spectra cards, there's other setups you can do with like Ode to Wrath, and actually all of them are really solid and limited. But at the same time, they also don't defend. So if your opponent puts pressure on you there, those cards can actually cost you. That's why cards like Rally the Rearguard are so important in Prism as well, I think. But yeah, there's definitely, Prism has a way to set up in games, which is great. Has a pretty solid mid game, so the hero is good if you have the right pool. But I think it's probably being a little bit overplayed at the moment.
Yeah, and with that, I know you said Rally the Rearguard, so why don't you tell me about a card that impressed you this weekend that you weren't super up on, but now after playing it, you're like, wow, that's a really strong card.
Yeah,
I mean, kind of stand out for you.
There's a few cards I think that we spoke about specifically in the set review last week that I've probably changed my opinion on a little bit. Just after playing with them, I think one that really stood out to me because it just did a lot of work for me personally, and actually I saw I played against an opponent where it was also really good for them, is Hell from Beyond. So Hell from Beyond is the shadow action that costs 2. At red it gives +3, and you can attack to your next action card, next attack action card, and it costs that's at red, and you can play it from Banish Zone and his go again. So it also has Blood Debt. So in Chain, for instance, you set that up or you hit that into your Banish Zone, you've got a way to use your hand as resources and then just give +3 damage on top, and not have to worry about going wide as much, because it is more difficult to get those go agains and go wide, but you get this mix of go wide and go tall. You can throw this on something that you put this on like a Surging Militia, for instance. It's really scary for the opponent. You're coming in for 8, and if they want to block with 2 cards, now it's for 10, for instance. So the card really performed well for me. maybe we'll just throw this back and forth, Brendan, a little bit. If there's a couple of cards we want to talk about, is there a card that you want to talk about that you maybe underrated or overrated?
I mean, yeah, so I had this one highly rated before, but you just said it there. I mean, Surging Militia is such an annoying card to block. it's especially if you pump it. Like, if you pump it, it's like very frustrating. But that's not my standout card, no matter how good it is. My standout card is going to be Rally the Rearguard, something we were all up on. But in a format where everything kind of blocks for 2 or blocks for nothing or blocks inefficiently, I played Brute with probably 5 to 7 0 blocks. Luckily, I had like 3 Rally the Rearguards. Being able to discard that card and make it essentially a block 3 with the instant speed ability of Rally the Rearguard, so good in this format, especially because we're looking at dominate effects and not a lot of defense reactions to deal with them.
Yep. Rally the Rearguard. I think it landed for me about where I thought it was. But maybe also I didn't actually play Levier or Prism, where I think those are the 2 kind of best decks for it. So, although my opponent did sort of survive on one of those once because he was able to rally and then discard an instant to block out and stay alive. One other card that we hadn't actually seen prior to the set review, but we saw during the weekend is Captain's Call. Captain's Call, if you're not sure if you got a chance to play with it, but generic action at rear, cost 0, and you get to choose one. Either the next attack action card with cost 2 or less at red, you play this turn gets +2, or the next attack action card with cost 2 or less, you play this turn gets Go Again. The card has Go Again, of course, and defense for 2. This card was so... Every time I saw it played, it was so important to what it did in each of those decks. So whether it was in Chain to allow the Go Again, whether it was in Bolton to give the buff to be able to present extra damage, and then for an on-hit effect plus then trigger Bolton's effect. I even saw a Prism player playing it to give their first attack Go Again and then come in with a Phantasm card. The card just did a lot of work every time I saw it in the weekend.
Yeah, very powerful card. Sorry, very powerful card. Jumbling up my words. But let's quickly get into a section I think a lot of people find very valuable, which is tell me about the traps and the common mistakes that you observed. So we talked a little bit about one that's very popular, at least here in North America, and that's going to be Prism Pile. What that means is basically if you played Arcane Rising, there was something called famously popularized by shout out to Session Blood.
Session Blood boys there,
yeah. Is the Runeblade piles. Basically, you would get your Runeblade cards, you would get your generics, you would toss them together, and you would fatigue your opponent out because you had the weapon, right? So a lot of people I observed in my pre-releases would get their Prism or the Prism cards, get their generic cards that block, throw them together, play 35 to 40 cards, and they were kind of winning in Prism mirrors because it was mostly Prism mirrors, mind you. Like Hayden said, it was like 80% light because they would just out fatigue the opponent. Nobody was kind of playing strategies. It's just weird in Monarch because Monarch, like we've talked about throughout this podcast, just a very setup dependent format, a very explosive format, a format with a lot of dominate as well, where this strategy is just actively bad, in my opinion. And you're just going to get punished so hard for players that will kind of whittle you down throughout the game and then pitch, these strong hands back to back where, you're going to be blocking for maybe 8 total in your hand or less than that because you have 0 blocks. But yeah, I definitely think 30 cards is probably where you want to be.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to that. I completely agree. I think in general, playing more than 30 in this format is not correct. And there's a couple of reasons. So the first one is, and you kind of alluded to a little bit, is that if I'm playing 30 cards and my opponent's playing, say, 38 cards, 37 cards, I'm 100% going to get back through my deck faster than they are, and unless they're playing Chain and something weird happens and they're banishing, and even then, actually 38 cards, there's still a chance that I'm going to get back at the same time as them. But getting back through your deck is so important because there's these powerful cards and these ways you can set up turns. So if I'm able to pitch and set that up, if I'm beating my opponent to what they're getting back from their pitch, I'm going to be so far ahead. And then they're just playing into a random 4-card hand that may or may not defend well. They could have a lot of two defense attacks or 2 defense cards because they've had to put them in their deck, even cards that don't defend because they've decided to play more cards. The other thing as well is that I don't think you can stall out games in this format. I think maybe in the previous weekend you could get away with it as people were learning the format and the cards. There's too much damage and there's not enough defensive value, basically. So playing extra cards and trying to block out and fatigue is, I think, basically not a strategy that's viable. The times I saw it was probably people playing Chain or people playing Levier and ended up sort of killing themselves, unfortunately. I played against people playing more than 30 cards, I think. A surprising number of times, actually. I didn't expect people to be doing it by default, but they were. But I guess that's probably a hangover of other formats. And just the quality of their turns was so low, so diminished because of just these extra cards that they had in their deck. I was struggling personally a lot of the time to get to 30 cards. It was cards I didn't really want to play, sort of my 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th card. That I would, and those are the cards I was kind of sideboarding depending on the matchup, moving in and out. But I really felt that I wanted to be at 30 cards. Even playing Chain, I think the most I played was 31 cards, I think, because I wanted to actively get to this end game and put pressure on my opponent with the best cards in my deck.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, let's talk a little bit about cards that don't block. I mean, the marquee cards of this set being the two promos we got, Eclipse Existence and Ray of Hope.
Yeah.
Both don't block and both are only playable against the opposing talent tree.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the set is riddled with cards that don't block. So just give me a quick rundown of what your opinions are about that, and then how many do you play in your deck? Is there too much?
Number? Yeah, is there a magic number?
Baiting you in there, but it's definitely yes. But give me the Hayden breakdown.
I think this is kind of, and if we're talking about, quote unquote traps, I guess like this is one of the things where you do need to be really careful of. This is something that as I laid out my deck before I would sort of decide on my last few cards was how many cards I have that don't defend. Because it is a cost, if I'm on average going to be drawing one a hand, for instance, that's not really where I want to be because it's going to narrow down the way that I can play out my hand. I'm going to be forced to, keep that card for my turn every single time because it doesn't defend unless I have something like Rally. So now I'm looking at playing basically a 3-card hand into my opponent's 4 or 5 for a defensive turn, and then I'm stuck with this card on my turn for whatever that might mean. So I'm definitely really conscious of that. I think it's if the more Rally the Rear Guard, for instance, you're able to play, then you can get away with playing a few more that don't defend potentially. I was looking around that sort of, depending on the hero I was playing, anywhere from 2 to 5 or 6. Levier, I was happy to play more because they were cards that I actively wanted to set up or did a lot of work on the offense. And that's why I'm so down on cards, and I saw them across the weekend, and I still think they're pretty bad. There's a card like Memorial Ground, because it just doesn't defend. It really doesn't do anything. I actually played it once because I had to side out. Like I couldn't play the war cards, as they're called, the Eclipse Existence and Ray of Hope, as Ellie's sister said they're called. I
had one Tenacity. That was why I had to play it. I had no win
had to
conditions.
wait to get back.
It was, I just had no win conditions. But I think that Memorial Ground is definitely just taking the cake on the worst card in Limited.
It's pretty filler. I do think I'm going to put Yellow Frontline Scout out there. I think that card is pretty bad. Defense for 2, attacks for 2, has to set up to get go again. I don't think that the seeing information as we talked about is important, but just go.
I think the ability is pretty terrible, but a card that has the potential. So I gave that card an F. I don't think it's an F actually. After playing with it, just because everything else is comparing it to the power level of the rest of the generics and the block value.
Mm-hmm.
The it having the ability to get go again, usually it's not when you on your arsenal, is the only thing that makes that card even remotely filler for me. Is maybe I can make this filler guard, I can clear it and still have a turn, right? Other than that, looking at the opponent's hand is just so irrelevant. I mean, it's a huge trap if you're playing Prism. It's I need to know if they have a 6 attack to do what I'm doing. That's not how you want to be playing Prism. You can actively pitch to later game states where you can see everything that's in their deck, right? Because they pitched it right in front of you. You can line it up with that. And you can also just not overcommit, don't Phantasmify into a Wartune Herald red when they might have the 6, right?
Yeah, I do. I think if I'm going to play it, it's probably a 29th or 30th card in Prism is probably where I'm going to play it, though, because that go again is relevant, and the information isn't. It's not actively harmful, right? It's going to give me something. So as minuscule as it is, that's probably where I play it. But I'm going to just quickly go back to, I want to round it out. We've segued a little bit, got off track a little bit. The instance piece, so all the cards that don't defend for 0. Yeah, I'm looking at that sort of 2 to 6 range. I'm trying to play as little as possible unless they're really impactful cards that help my overall strategy, or I need to because I need to get to 30 cards or whatever it might be. And then, I'm actively thinking about, okay, how am I going to use these cards to make sure they don't impact me in game. Like pitching cards that defend for 0 is a real risk because now your opponent knows when those are coming back and they can actively try and target you with attacks to punish you for that. So you've got to be really careful about pitching cards like that. It's like pitching a Remembrance in Constructed, right? You're like, well, I know I'm going to get this back, but also this is a bit of a risk here.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly. Yeah. I remember that in the early Welcome to Wraith Constructed days, pitching those Remembrances and just being like dreading the moment you're going to draw into it.
I wish you wanted to. Yeah, we're talking about, I guess, traps, and there's another one I wanted to just talk about, and it kind of goes back to that, like, how am I going to win a game piece? But I think you said you had seen it as well as people playing Livia and basically just banishing as soon as possible to play these attacks for whatever reason, because they want to push damage, or maybe they might have even arsenaled a card that requires you to banish cards to play it. Basically, what you're doing is you're starting a clock on yourself. As soon as you banish that first Blood Debt card, you're starting a clock. At some point, your opponent is going to be able to put pressure on you, or you're not going to have the hand that you need, or the game set's going to get to a point where you run out of 6 attacks, where you're not going to be able to fulfill Levy's ability, and you could lose the game. So you're starting a clock of, okay, now I need to win the game in X amount of turns by doing whatever it is. So I think that was kind of a thing I saw people doing, and really to their detriment a lot, is starting that clock, sort of first, second turn, and not really having the bottom of the deck set up yet, at least in
or even their graveyard, right?
Or even the graveyard, yeah.
And the graveyard is a resource in that deck.
It is, yeah. So really important to think about those cards. Was there anything else that you wanted to speak up, Brendan, that you saw that you feel is really important to just cover because it's something to avoid?
Yeah, so we can just talk about it as a fundamental concept. We've said it so many times, but it's pitch to win, right? And there's a really very easy and very helpful exercise you can do with this. After a game, if you still have a deck, right? If you haven't gone to Fatigue, lay it out and just go, would I ever want to draw this? Like, look at it in groups of 4. Would I ever want to draw this hand? Like, is this winning the game in endgame scenarios? So once you finish, pick up your deck, look at the bottom of those cards, and maybe you can play some memory games there as well. But yeah, I mean, just huge trap for newer players, and in general is I would just see people, my opponents, just pitching blue after blue, like Minnowism into any other generics that they had no synergy, right? So when they got to to the end game state, where I had loaded the bottom of my deck with reds and good resource bases and other cards, they were blocking for 8 or 6 total in their entire hand. So it's just a fundamental concept of Flesh and Blood that has been sort of heightened by Monarch, but it's pitch to win, and I guess it all kind of ties into you're rebuilding your deck. This is like a core tenet of Flesh and Blood, and while you're doing that, you're creating a strategy to win the game, ideally.
Yeah, it's like you're regrouping the troops, right? That's what basically in the thematic theme of Flesh and Blood is how I kind of look at it. You're in a battle, and then you're regrouping for your I guess your next strategy. Basically, you're getting these ready, and it's a balancing act because I think you at the same time you could fall into a trap of over pitching these reds and yellows and not being able to put pressure on early because you're trying to set up the bottom of your deck. So you've got to balance it out for sure. But I think the way that I'm seeing at the moment is more of the other way, where a lot of blues end up on the bottom of the deck and an in-game setup, or the consideration isn't necessarily there. I wanted to talk about one thing, which I think is not necessarily a trap, but it's something that I think is really important to this format. And I observed in basically every game of Sealed I played or just watched over the course of the weekend. And it's this idea of a pivot turn, which is basically because of the power level of these cards and the ability to set up an in-game, there's almost this, I'm calling it a pivot turn, I guess, which is this turn where someone's going to try and really take the initiative. They've got their setup ready. They're going to try and push the damage. And because of the amount of 2 defenses and 0 defenses, things like that, it's going to be hard to stop them, right? It's going to be hard to stop their on-hit effects or just the sheer amount of damage they're going to push, whether it be something from Bolton or Chain or Prism. And what I found is that you often had to identify these turns as the opponent and say, okay, well, I need to attack to present as much damage as possible to try and actively take cards out of their hand, because otherwise I'm probably going to lose the game from here. They've hit their pivot turn before I've hit mine, and I'm now going to eventually lose the game. I'm not sure if you had this experience, Brendan, but it really came down to sort of life totals where I'll use an example. Yep. So my opponent was on 7 life and I was on 11 life, and they were playing Bolton. and I knew from what they'd pitched that they had a Via the Vanguard turn set up. And I had a position where I had Take Flight in my hand. I could have played out 3 cards, got my Take Flight into Arsenal, and set up my turn, right? But if I did that, they actually could have just not defended. They could have gone to 1, and they could have come back at me, and I probably would have been losing the game on that turn because of how big their turn was. So much bigger than mine, and I wouldn't have enough life left to play with to be able to keep my cards and play my turn out. So my decision then became, okay, well, now I feel that I actually have to push and deal as much damage to them as possible to take cards out of their hand. So I could present 9 damage, which would take a card out of their hand at minimum. And so I did that, went through that, and then they weren't able to, because their hand had basically been pulled apart now, they actually weren't even able to present much damage. I think it was 7 in total in the end. And I was able to block out with 2 cards and just rebalance the game state. I got them through their pivot turn, and then I was able to set up another, I guess, pivot turn for myself 2 turns down the track until I actually managed to win the game eventually. And that was something that I noticed. That was probably the best example of it, but something that I noticed throughout the weekend is these key turns and identifying it for yourself and for the opponent. And it just happened a lot more than I'd seen in other formats, I think, because of the power level of the cards and how inefficiently the cards defend as well. Not sure if you saw this at all, Brendan. It could just be me.
No, I think you summed it up pretty well, but did I see this? Of course I did. So me and Hayden played a few games, and yeah, I lost both games to this exact strategy, or kind of him recognizing these pivot turns. Is I would have lethal in my hand, and I could be up at 7 or 10, and preserve my life total to go for this large spill blood turn, or go for this Via the Vanguard turn, or something like that. And then Hayden would realize that, and he would do a more unorthodox attack where he would, for instance, he cracked his time slippers and came in inefficiently, but for exactly lethal, and I had to defend with my cards. I couldn't get off my big turn, and then I just lose the game, right? Mm-hmm. Where if he had presented, if he had decided to Arsenal and tried to play it like he had played the other turn cycles, I would have just been able to not defend, attack out, rip his whole entire hand, come in again, and just keep doing that. So yeah, I mean, it's a massive part of Flesh of Blood, and I honestly, if you want to hear how to do it, you got to hear how to do it from Hayden, because I've never met a player who's better at recognizing that scenario than you are, because it's extremely frustrating to face.
I could just be timing it right, yeah. I think it comes down to the pitch and recognizing game states, and I think it's something that in the future of the pod we're definitely going to jump into more, and we might try and get on a guest who can do it, well as the best of them, and pick their brain about it as well, and try and I guess maybe do a bit of a crash course or a rundown of how to play those kind of turns out and how to recognize basically all parts of it. So I think we'll try and do that in the future, yeah, Brennan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I think we should wrap up the strategy section there and kind of go into something a bit more lighthearted. I know it was a crazy experience for me, this pre-release, because in the US I went to 2 events that had 32 people each. It was the first time I've been in a room with that many people in probably years, and I ended up actually running into a lot of people that I had not met before, and to make it even cooler, they had actually listened to the pod and approached me and kind of were talking about it. And it was just it was kind of a surreal experience for me, because I've never been in that sort of situation. For instance, on Sunday, I actually met a guy. He drove down, I think it was from Missouri to Texas. So if that's a long drive, I think it's definitely over 12 hours. So I don't think it's close to 20. Yeah. Yeah. He had drove down to Texas just for the Sunday pre-release. He had done I think it was another one in Oklahoma, which is 3 hours north of us. But basically drove I guess it probably ended up being a total of 30 hours just to do these pre-releases. And he was I was after the day when I won Levy. He was hey man, can I take a look at your deck list? I was oh yeah. Why don't I just send it to you on Discord? Yeah, so I pulled up my Discord. He's oh, you're 50 Shades? Oh, no way. Because he was some guy who's super active in Wall Street. He's yeah, I'm this guy. I don't know if you know me, and all this stuff. And he totally came down all by himself, didn't know anyone, and drove all the way down to Texas to just jam some games.
That's I mean, this community is awesome. It's genuinely one of the best sort of communities of games I've ever played in, and people were I had similar experiences across the weekend. People were super nice. Every game I played, everyone was having fun. Just the buzz in the room about not only the set but just the game as a whole was crazy across the 3 I went to. Had some people come and have a chat about the format and about games, and a couple of people said, they listened to the pod and really enjoyed what we'd put together for the set review. It was great to hear as well. So yeah, it was just to be honest, it's probably the best pre-release of any game I've ever had. I played Magic for 15 plus years, and those are always great events. But the fanfare, I guess, the way that LSS did the previous season, the way that the pre-releases were done, obviously with first edition products, people getting really excited about some of the pools that were happening across the room, and everyone excited for them. It was just a great sort of atmosphere to be in for the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It was my best pre-release experience ever, right? All the Magic pre-releases, none of those even came close to comparing. Just the hype going into into this for the set was just, it was ridiculous. Like, people were so ready to crack open those packs, pull those code foils, and also just get their hands on a set that just like sort of totally changed the game, right? Like, we're all sitting there and nobody knows what they're doing, and there's all these crazy heroes and like this banished zone, and there's light, and yeah, it was really, really fun. Like, I very much enjoyed this pre-release weekend.
And Brendan, I'm gonna have to ask, did you pull anything shiny? Did you pull anything good?
So, yeah, I mean, it's a funny story. So I went with my partner, right? So we had like a collective, like, I guess, group of pulls, and we didn't pull anything. We pulled all commons and rares. No, I'm kidding. It was like a couple of majestics. They're like whatever, right? And then on Monday, my TCG player pre-release box comes in. It comes in and it's damaged. Like, it's totally smashed, and like it's just like there's no way, because like I've put some money into a first edition product that I have coming like later this week that I'm not gonna open. I specifically got it to invest in it, and like this probably would have been in that section as well. But it comes in, the box just totally damaged, and I was just like, I know it's in here. This is it, right? So I actually just cracked the packs, which I never do. I never crack packs. I always do like sealed with my partner, or I never just crack to like open packs. I literally have never done that in Flesh and Blood. And lo and behold, I pulled Phantasmal Footsteps, the Illusionist Legendary Boots, which is actually the legendary I wanted to get. I would have tried to trade for it if I had pulled anything else, except Library. But super, super pumped about getting it. So I did get the cold foil in the end.
Nice.
What about you, Hayden?
Nothing really for me. A few Majestics, of course. I think I had 2 foil Majestics, which is great. No cold foils, unfortunately, but did have my friend sitting next to me at the pre-release open a cold foil legendary, so that was great. Eclipse. So yeah, it was cool. It was just cool just to see people open their packs. Someone opened a library at the first pre-release I went to. Opened the Fable, which was pretty nuts. Yeah, it's crazy. Some cool opens.
Did you see the alt art? Sorry, this I'm kind of geeking off script. I'm geeking off script here, but did you see the alt art Galaxy Black?
I didn't see one in real life, but I saw the picture, and I did see.
I saw one in real life. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, they look nice. I did see an extended art Mark of the Beast. The extended art Majestic foils. Yeah, which are cool. Yeah, for sure.
It's like Mark of the Beast, Luminous Ascension. I heard Phantasmaclasm. I haven't seen it. And then I don't know what Shane's is.
Yeah, not sure.
Who knows, right? So like, in order to like fully round this out, we're going into our professional events, Melbourne and Auckland. We have our podcast proxy. Hayden's going to be competing for all of us. But Hayden, I need to hear your early meta calls. Tell me what's going to happen. Tell me what the event's going to look like. We have a very interesting event, right? We have a sealed Swiss round on Saturday. And then on Sunday, you could potentially be doing 3 drafts, if I understand correctly. Mm-hmm. By the way, anybody who plays in the events and hasn't played in Flesh and Blood event before, you're spoiled. Because you guys will never experience the 15-hour calling that that was so common. No more. I guess we moved to 2-day events. We're no longer going to be degenerates and play for 15 hours and dude, no breaks in between rounds. Is such a grind.
Yeah.
But Hayden, bring me into your mind. What is it going to look like? What do you like? Do you have any like hopes about the set? Is there anything you're up on? Obviously, don't give away like any secrets or anything like that. But just bring me into your mind as the competitor in the face of Arsenal Pass at these events.
I don't have any secrets, but not yet anyway. I mean, I think the format it's super interesting. I think I'm not 100% sure what it's going to look like from a seal perspective and a draft perspective yet. I think people are going to be really rewarded by building their seal pools well, and having sort of practiced across all of the heroes probably, and be able to identify what a strong seal pool looks like and how to build it. I think that we'll probably see some really unique strategies come out. So people will definitely identify some cards that work, either synergize really well together or are really good in-game setups. I think because this format allows for such strong in-games, as we've already talked about, was sort of the core of the pod today. I think people are going to be able to identify some cards that work really, really well together to be able to do that. I think in draft, we're going to see some really, really cool stuff, though. So sealed, maybe not as much, but draft, we're going to see some really cool stuff. There's some, there's stuff like Belittle, Minimalism, Overload. There's like a really cool deck there that we kind of alluded to last week that now I've seen and played with these cards. I think is a legitimately real deck that you can draft.
Crazy.
I think there's gonna be a few things like that in certain strategies. There's gonna be a deck that probably tries to draft like as many Seeds of Agony as possible and just like stacks the same game of seeds that people can't defend with like Vexing Malice or whatever it is. So there's gonna be some crazy stuff in draft. I think and if you're drafting over the next few weeks, just think about some of these like cool things you can be doing. Think about interactions that are there. Or what if I manage to get 5 or 6 of X card? What can I do with it, or whatever it might be? So. That's kind of my take. I think we'll see some cool stuff for draft, and yeah,
for sure. I'm so bummed that I can't fly there and compete, but I am also so happy that I'm gonna be able to watch. I've already got like my watch party set up, like no stress. I don't have like total enjoyment. I've wanted to watch a professional limited event like literally since this game came out, but this is going to be the first ones that both are going to be covered, by the way, from what I understand. Both awesome. Auckland and Melbourne will have coverage. I really, really, really hope that on day 2 they do put a camera over someone's shoulder who's drafting. That's like my favorite part about TGGPs is when they do that, and you can really get in the mind of like a high level player when they're drafting. So we will see, but I'm super excited. And yeah, until next week, that's going to be it for us. And
all right. Well, until next week. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Cheers.